Vinishish, Masicho, Shoni Tan, Mary Jane, Jim, for that very generous and warm welcome and introduction. True, Naata Adlich, Chani Tlakshet, Utlasish A-in-chut, Histakshit La Hoset, Nu Chonoflet, Tlakish Beat Ma As. I am A-in-chut, coming from the village of Ahouset. Recognize my uncle Wickaninish and my family who's here with me has been acknowledged. Little village off the west coast of Vancouver Island, and I must say, was that not a glorious welcome that we all received this morning? Hatwea, chiefs, Yakbisu, Ahirpit, those of you who are elders, the veterans who we are proud to honor here this morning, and all the delegates and dignitaries who've gathered, leaders of both today and, as was recognized, leaders of yesterday, whose work and impact is still being felt here. I acknowledge my fellow executive members of the Assembly of First Nations, regional chiefs. I know we've already been treated to an incredible welcome, along with members of the Women's Council, the Youth Council, and the Elders Council who are here with us this morning. Grandma Susie helped welcome us the other night. Yukoners know who Grandma Susie is. Helping to reflect that, as was mentioned during a welcoming feast the other night, that while difficult our journey has been, we still have our sense of humor. The people here of the North have expressed that to us, and that warm welcome that they've offered, that I join in welcoming all of you to this, our 34th annual meeting. And in reality, when we think back, it's more than 4 decades of annual meetings as Indigenous nations from across the country. Regional Chief Smith, I know we're really appreciative when you and former Regional Chief Eric Morris, when you welcomed us. Several years ago, we had this discussion, and I know that, as was referenced here, I feel so privileged to spend so much time amongst you, here in your beautiful territories, spending time in your communities. Thank you for welcoming us here, and we really appreciate all the effort that's gone into this gathering. And I join the Regional Chief in his acknowledgement. How about the powerful expression of leadership by the women in this Yukon territory? Chiefs Kane, Chiefs Vance, Tikshitsisi Hut, Hutwe Hiksu, Hutwood Vance, Hutwood Kane, Kwanlin Dun First Nation, Ta'an, Kwa'achan Council, Machinopsik, Matikitsu, Tagish Kwan territory, home of the Southern Tutoni. It is truly an honor to be here amongst all of you. C'est un grand honneur
to be following you. Je salue les chefs du Québec.
We're thankful. You can see it's taken 2 men to support a woman in the co-chair roles. For all of the chiefs, I was so thankful to be in Quebec just a week ago. So, para moi, je ne parle pas le français.
Forgive me, I don't speak French. I understand a little bit.
All must remember that which connects us. As Cookby Ron just reminded us that we come from distinct cultures with our own languages. Very often, wherever we come from, our language is first our own indigenous language, and then the second will be that which was brought. For much of Canada, that's English. We acknowledge those for whom French became their first language after their own. And so it is that we hold our gatherings in English and French, recognizing this history. This is the first time in 21 years that we've gathered here in the Yukon. And what an incredible experience. I am absolutely looking forward, as Grand Chief Kelly articulated, to this week and to an energizing meeting, beginning with the good feelings that the nations of the North have expressed here. As we've heard and will see in the coming days, Yukon First Nations are absolutely driving success and partnerships based on their rights and their responsibilities. Just last week, White River successfully challenged and won an important court battle, affirming their full right to meaningful consultation. This court battle expressing the requirement for their consent on resource development. And we heard here as well that just days ago, Trondek Dwetjen achieved an agreement to ensure their language and culture is embedded in every aspect of education for their peoples and for others as well. I heard a yes behind me. Yes. And to hear the history of the 20th anniversary of the Yukon Umbrella Final Agreement by the people, for the people, who bore the name Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. A powerful vision that speaks to all of us. And local chiefs giving their ages away, saying that they were the children. Thinking back to that moment, what it must have been like, you saw those pictures, the work that's been inherited by Grand Chief Ruth Massey, the chiefs here in the Yukon, regional chief. That powerful vision that we saw expressed in the video. 40 years ago, delivering that message to then Prime Minister Trudeau, and you heard the acknowledgement that just as those in the mainstream leadership bear children, the name was mentioned. This is not a partisan comment. Justin. So too, you see here, we as well have leadership passed on generation to generation. That's been expressed powerfully here by the Yukon leaders already. Once again, as we gather to deliberate, to have important discussions amongst this gathering, it's our role to set out the plans and strategies for the days, weeks, and months ahead. We know that as we gather right now, as always, that we face critical and urgent issues that command our attention and they demand action. We gather knowing that it is our time to stand strong in our rights, our title and our treaties. And we gather knowing, as has been expressed here by the chiefs of the Yukon, in their vision being given expression in the Umbrella Agreement, that it's time to stand strong together. As National Chief, a key part of my work, which I really appreciate, is accepting invitations to meet with you in your communities and territories. I can't say that I was the best construction guy on that home building site. It's moments like that where I see firsthand the successes as are being reflected here and the gains, but also the challenges that we're facing. I think recently that many hearts and minds were with the people in Treaty 7 territories throughout Alberta. I was there with Regional Chief Alexis. You and I were there together with the people, hit by the massive flooding. Now we know that downtown Calgary got most of the headlines, but I know that by now you know that so many First Nations communities were very hard hit by the rising waters. Having been there 3 times since the flooding really started to hit, I have to share it was overwhelming to witness this kind of natural disaster in person. I recall talking, as I know the regional chief did, with families from Tsutina, Morley, Siksika, People speaking through tears, devastated by the losses, facing an uncertain future. Yet what was most remarkable was seeing the incredible courage and kindness of a community coming together, hearing about people checking in on one another, making sure that the elders and the children are cared for and safe, the volunteers and the support. This is what keeps the spirit strong. The spirit was never lost, even though so many material possessions were lost. It's that spirit that the chiefs and their citizens harnessed to get the attention that they need. They got the attention of the province and the federal government and demanded that they work together to save their communities, their traditional territory that sustained them throughout the generations. Now the hard work of recovery and rebuilding is going to require our ongoing and continued support every single step of the way. I mention this in particular because it's very clear that in moments of crisis, when everyone needs one another, we can quickly, very rapidly cut through the barriers and the gaps that block action. The physical, political, and jurisdictional barriers seemingly melt away in these moments. Our agenda, that which compels us to gather here, the First Nations agenda, it requires that everyone come together, just as Treaty 7 pulled First Nations and their neighbors together to deal with and respond to the rising water. One of the elders that was in a meeting where we were gathered with the Treaty 7 leadership said, and I quote, "The treaty relationship demands that we do this work, that we come together among our own nations, and that government comes to the table respectfully to fulfill its duties as partner to the relationship. We all have a role. This must be honored and respected." This takes us back to the spirit that was very much evident at the time for those who engaged in treaty. It's the way of our nations throughout the country. We have inherent responsibility to our lands, to our waters and peoples. We have inherent rights as nations to work in full respect with one another and as equal partners with other governments. It's helpful to hear premiers and mayors reflecting the truth and reality of the history of a territory. This must be the way we engage with one another every single day. I look around and I see today that beyond the headlines of floods and fires, many of our First Nations face a perpetual state of crisis. Our people are crammed into crumbling homes and collapsing communities. Almost half of our children are living in poverty, in care right now than at the height of the residential school era. Our young people are more likely to end up in jail than to graduate. These statistics are stark. They're sobering, and we don't need to recite them again. But we can ask the Canadian government and all Canadians, is this the Canada that they want to stand for? Is this the kind of country that they want to believe in? Our organizations, all of them, including the Assembly of First Nations, tribal councils, provincial territorial organizations, are challenged by constantly diminishing and imposed funding cuts, all part of a broken system that creates demands for more with fewer resources. Our goal, our priority, our strategy is to find the ways to empower and support one another. This is a call to unity. This is not a call that suggests that we are all the same. We are not. It does not mean that we must march in lockstep or abandon our diversity. Unity means first and foremost understanding and respecting our diversity. It means we must listen and understand one another. It means driving towards our common values and shared interests and priorities. That is how we drive change. That is how we smash the status quo. This is how we break past the barriers and the gaps. It's how we push progress and compel what's required now, which is concrete action. We are often united in opposition. We know what we don't want. We reject top-down approaches and one-size-fits-all attitudes. Those will never work for peoples as rich and as diverse as our nations. This is why in 2010 I challenged the government to work with us to move beyond the Indian Act. And you heard it here from the leaders. Many here within the Yukon are already beyond the Indian Act, setting out their own future. So we know that which it is that we oppose. That is only half the fight. This includes looking at how we're structured, how we operate as an organization of and for First Nations and the National Executive. We were having these discussions even as we met in the last few days, that the Assembly of First Nation continually renews itself and must renew itself as we move out of the darkness of colonization and into the light of nation building. And it is up to our leaders and our citizens to step up and take responsibility for our future and for our lives. We must set our own agenda and we must make it happen. We must consider every aspect of our organization to be inclusive, respectful, to maximize our resources, increase our independence, and overall our sustainability, consistent with the vision and mandated provided by you, the nations from across the country. We have before us a very full and a very comprehensive agenda for this week. And in each of these areas, we need to do the hard work of understanding one another, respecting each other's challenges, and charting clear strategies to support one another's efforts to drive that change. Our work, for example, on education is clear and confirmed. We echo the elders who decades ago began the call for First Nations control of First Nations education. We don't want unilaterally imposed legislation delivered from on high by the government. We want to create our own systems that are sustainable, that support our children's success and that value their languages and cultures. But yes, we need more resources. Our schools, as now well understood, are underfunded compared to students in provincial schools. So it is about fair and equitable resources. But it's not only about more resources. We must also blanket our children in proper systems and full supports. I think about the Mi'kmaq and the Atlantic, places like Nova Scotia, where they are a living, dynamic example that by coming together, wresting full control away from government and pressing for government agreement and support, First Nations can propel their learners to incredible success. That is the cornerstone of their pride as nations and an anchor to their resurgence and success as nations. Think about moments spent with my colleague from the Atlantic, Regional Chief Morley Gugu, thinking about the report that you reflected to the chiefs here in Assembly on the time we spent visiting with the children. They are in his area exceeding the provincial standards, and they are hitting an almost 90% high school graduation rate, well above the provincial average. And equally important, these are learners equipped with all the skills and knowledge to compete in the 21st century economy, yet fully versed in their traditional teachings, their language, and their culture. This, very much the theme of the Yukon First Nations high school grad that I attended here in Whitehorse just last month. Recognize you Yukon leaders for standing up your graduates on the shore of this mighty river. This is what we all have to strive for, and it is happening. But we need a new approach that makes these school systems and these young people not the exception, but our expectation. We are demanding, and we will build these systems because the right to educate our children is a fundamental right. Let me be clear. As I've said many times before, it has always been the position of the Assembly of First Nations and continues to be the position that treaty leaders and citizens take the lead on implementing their treaty, not the Assembly of First Nations and the National Chief. Any discussions on treaty implementation must be on a treaty-by-treaty, nation-to-nation approach. You see, the Assembly of First Nations is not a signatory to any treaty. It's not the role of the national chief to negotiate the implementation or enforcement of any treaty. The role of the Assembly of First Nations is to stand with the treaty nations in a supporting role and assist in any and all efforts to compel the federal government and all governments to respect and honor the treaties. This is the nature of the work mandated to the Assembly of First Nations by Chiefs in Assembly under Resolution number 7 from 2010. This is why we convened the National Treaty Forum last March, and the treaty leaders are now driving the agenda. A number of treaty regions are pressing forward and engaging with the Crown and calling on Canada. In some cases, challenging Canada, get to the table and start negotiating. How it is that Canada needs to uphold its obligation to honor the spirit and intent of the treaties as is understood by the treaty citizens and their leaders. The original understanding is something that must be implemented. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples calls on Canada to honor that it is a successor state that must see those treaties implemented in the manner in which treaty nations understand them. This is the nature of the responsibilities that we have. It is challenging to bring Canada to the table. This is the difficult work that we're involved in, but it's absolutely fundamental. It means nothing less than giving the spirit and intent of the treaties as understood by our elders and our ancestors who entered into these agreements to protect our lands, our traditional territories, our peoples, and our ways of life. And we fully express our support to the peace and friendship treaties, pre-Confederation treaties, and the numbered treaties, some in fact who gather right now in Treaty 6 territory. Yesterday we offered sacred medicine and ceremony with the elders to help guide us to find the way to support one another in full respect. The elders, including those from our host region, right here, have shared a prophecy of all nations gathering in the north as a place of healing, and encouraged us to find answers and inspiration in the wisdom of the ancestors. The National Executive and I joined together in extended greetings and expressions of respect and support to those Treaty 1 to 11 nations gathering this week. One of our National Executive Regional Chief, Perry Bellegarde, is in fact in attendance at those gatherings today. This is what we mean by unity, supporting and respecting one another. The efforts of the Yukon Chiefs 40 years ago, 20 years under an umbrella agreement that they brought to the federal government so that the rights would be respected and implemented. And so do we stand in supporting all treaty nations. We all have rights and responsibilities, and I personally know what it means to fight for our rights and give life to those rights, whether demonstrating in our canoes out on the waters, because I'm a West Coast guy, or on the lands to drive awareness, or fighting and, like the court case here, winning, as we did amongst us as the Nuu-chah-nulth, a decade-long fight to affirm our commercial right to fishing back home. I stand side by side with you in these fights, knowing that we have inherited these rights and have the responsibility to see them implemented. I know that we will win when we stand strong together. Central to our work is our effort to press for agreements to be upheld and fundamental reform to comprehensive claims. There is no doubt that current government policy is completely inadequate and inconsistent with legal developments. We finally have agreement on the need for reform, a clear timeline and process to achieve this change. We will press forward and be unrelenting in our pursuit of full recognition and reconciliation and a final and permanent end to extinguishment and denial. As mandated by you, we're joining, and I see the Chief is here, joining the Tsilhqot'in Nation, Chilcotin, as interveners in the Supreme Court case, often known as the Williams case, and we recognize, I see Chief Roger here with us today. This is part of our work that we stand as the Assembly of First Nations as interveners in their Supreme Court case to once and for all banish the notions of terra nullius and the doctrine of discovery as racist relics of the colonial past that have no place in the modern world. We stand firm in insisting that Canada must recognize, respect, and reconcile our rights. There are fundamental conditions moving forward, fundamental to respect our history and our rights, and fundamental to our shared future. Across all areas and territories, we can work together based on respect for our diversity while supporting one another on a path to our shared goals. We will not play the tired old games of divide and conquer. Never forget that those that want to hold us back relish nothing more than when we fight amongst ourselves, and fear nothing more than when we stand together strong and united. We will as well mark the 250th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation this year, a proclamation which led to the Treaty of Niagara in 1764, where a nation-to-nation relationship between settlers and Indigenous peoples was renewed and the covenant chain of friendship was affirmed. The Royal Proclamation, and more importantly, the Treaty of Niagara, established recognition and protection of Indigenous rights as a clear requirement and foundation for development of this land. Canada exists today because of relations established in the goodwill and good faith of Indigenous nations. Those are the terms of the treaties that are not negotiable and must be implemented. We will push for respect of our agreements and our original relationships on all fronts in areas like resource revenue sharing. With governments, we are engaged in political outreach to all parties because our agenda goes beyond any one party and any one Prime Minister. We're using advocacy in action, such as the upcoming meeting of all provincial premiers and territorial leaders at the Council of the Federation later this month, when we will press for action on murdered and missing Indigenous women, safety, as well as emergency preparations. We are pressing the public and private sector, informing Canadian citizens of their true history and telling them that strong First Nations makes for a strong Canada. The private sector is beginning to realize that First Nations have a key role in any development that's planned in and around our traditional territories. These industries are in turn pressing the government for real change based on free, prior and informed consent, and where First Nations see development as respectful, responsible and sustainable real revenue sharing arrangements. And we are taking our message to the international community, including the recent gathering in advance of the United Nations World Conference on Indigenous Peoples to be held in New York City in 2014. We will ensure that the upcoming visits of the UN observers, including the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, results in a mirror being held up to this country of Canada in a moment of truth and a moment for us to set out our plans, conditions and requirements for success led by and for all our nations. And we honor all those who have lobbied internationally at the Organization of American States and the United Nations for decades, many years, prominent leaders like International Chief Wilton Littlechild. Thank you for your leadership. Grand Chief Ed John, working as a representative here, and many others who make sure that the world knows the real story. We will stand, importantly, with our people, pressing for real change. We've been inspired and energized by the actions of Idle No More and other movements, led by women, inspired by the people, and incredibly energized by the youth. Groups like the brave, focused and humble leaders, the young Cree from Nishiyu, you remember them. They walked 1,600 kilometers from their home territories. I, like you, I'm sure, feel inspired when I see First Nations across the country and have the chance to visit, like here in the Yukon, a place where 40 years of constant effort has achieved so much, and they continue their hard work and dedication for their peoples. This is absolutely a critical time, and yes, there is energy in the air. We are demanding change on our terms to reach our goals. We will occupy the field. We will occupy the ground and give expression and action to our rights. just as I witnessed in the determination of the young volunteers I met in Morley, helping keep their people safe, and references to the brilliance of treaty making and the way it should be going forward. Like I heard in the sounds of the Mi'kmaq language in every corner of their bright new school in the Atlantic, as I saw in the eyes of young men and women seizing every opportunity at the I-Count School or Otter River Cree School in Manitoba this past spring. And here, where I visited, the renowned veteran and winner of the Inspire Lifetime Achievement Award, 96-year-old Alex Van Bibber, right here from the Yukon. I had a chance to have lunch with him last time I visited. Sat down with him and a young Tahltan young man, 13-year-old Jedrick. And as you saw by the dancers who came out here this morning, I spoke with a mom whose 5-year-old was amongst those dancers. She was cradling her baby. I see young people who are here, sitting with perhaps dads, uncles, grandparents. We see the generations coming back together again. The resurgence both of family and of nationhood. I stand here thinking about these moments, feeling completely confident in our success, because I am confident in our peoples, and I am confident in you. We will indeed emerge stronger together today for our children tomorrow. Let me leave you finally with the words of a leader from a land continents away, but yet tied directly to our struggle. A true Indigenous leader for the world. Nelson Mandela celebrates his 95th birthday this week. And for all of us in this struggle, his words hold great inspiration and encouragement. As he said, it always seems impossible until it's done. Thank you to the chiefs of the Yukon for having us. Masi Cho, Shoni Fan, Gunis Chesh, Pleko. Thank you very much and have a great week.